This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly flagship show, Marijuana Today, as well as the Weed Wonks and Green Rush podcasts, which you can find over at weedwonks.com and greenrushpodcast.net. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Wednesday, March 11th, 2020, and you're tuned in to episode 902 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Bruce Barcott over at Leafly leads off the day's news with a new edition of his Editorial Haymaker column, where he compares the terrible response shown so far by the US CDC to the ongoing coronavirus outbreak to how it handled last year's vape health scare. Mainly, Bruce lasers in on the shift in how the CDC was once a competent and confidence-inspiring federal agency that is now primarily concerned with making dictator Trump feel good about himself and hiding, as much as possible, the actual impact from the virus. Again, to protect Trump's soft sense of self-worth. Bruce points out the parallels with the CDC ignoring the science, showing what was actually causing last year's vape health scare with how they are doing things now, like avoiding testing people for the coronavirus, so as to keep the overall reported numbers down. Again, at the behest of the vile Trump. Read this story. Mr. Kyle Yeager over Marijuana Moment takes us down to Mississippi for our second top headline of the day, as lawmakers in the state house have passed a bill that would put a medical marijuana legalization measure before voters in the fall. A possibility we touched on recently here on The Daily. While that headline would normally be a cause for celebration, in this case, it's actually not, as the legislation, passed by a count of 72 to 49, is designed as a more restrictive alternative to a better medical cannabis initiative recently passed via the ballot measure process, which gathered more than 200,000 signatures of support along the way. This new legislation is designed to either split the vote so that neither measure passes, or to at least ensure the passage of the more restrictive program. HCR 39 now heads over to the Senate for consideration there, where it is expected to pass. We end the day's top headlines with news of another piece of marijuana-related legislation, this time in Iowa, where the state house just passed a bill by a count of 52 to 46 that changes how the state's limited medical marijuana program measures and restricts the amount of products containing THC that each patient can buy and use. Currently, medical cannabis patients in Iowa are limited to buying products that have no more than 3% THC in them. Under the new scheme, if passed by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, as it's expected to, patients would be free to instead have up to 4.5 grams of THC per 90-day period. The new system offers exemptions from the limits for people who are terminally ill or whose doctor recommends that they require a higher limit. Swing over to the Des Moines Register for more here. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly flagship show, Marijuana Today, as well as the Weed Wonks and Green Rush podcasts, which you can find over at weedwonks.com and greenrushpodcast.net. If you like legal marijuana business podcasts, and I'm guessing that you do because you're listening to this show, then I would highly recommend that you tune into all the other cannabis shows that we produce here at MJ Today Media. We built our small little network so that each of our titles complement one another in terms of coverage. So this podcast right here is all about getting each day's news fast, while Marijuana Today takes some time to dive into the industry's top few most important stories each week. Weed Wonks and Green Rush are both similar in that they're both interview shows, but each has its own cool and unique take on the industry. With the Green Rush spending most of its time looking at marijuana capital markets and marketing and PR and communications, while the Weed Wonks dives into the world of cannabis legislation, lobbying, and implementation. If you listen to each marijuana show that we make here at MJ Today Media each week, you will be an expert in our industry in short order. It's the quickest and easiest way to make sure you know everything you need to know exactly when you need to know it. amp up your marijuana podcast game today by visiting greenrushpodcast.net, weedwonks.com, and mjtodaypodcast.com. All right, time for the Blitz. Kyle has another headline on the day, as he does, with news that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will reopen indefinitely the window for people to submit comments on how CBD should be regulated. Regular listeners might remember that the FDA held a public comment window open last year as it continues to work on regulations for how hemp CBD can be grown, processed, and sold. Apparently, the agency is still hungry for more of your thoughts. Go submit them. According to new numbers recently released by officials in California, legal marijuana sales have brought in just over $1 billion in taxes and fees to the state in the 2 years since adult use sales became legal in January of 2018. The state has struggled to roll out its adult use program, with major hiccups popping up in the forms of overly high taxes and restricted access for a large percentage of the population. Not a bad one to add to your list if you do business in California. We have a couple of financial reports, with Columbia Care up first, as it saw fourth quarter adjusted revenue of $24.5 million for the quarter ending December 31st. The annual amount of adjusted revenue was $78.8 million. That broke down further to a gross profit of $5.5 million on the year and an adjusted EBITDA loss of just under $14 million. Up from last year's loss of $2.9 million, which the company attributed to its aggressive build-out into new markets. New Cannabis Ventures has more numbers and details here. Next up is Canadian marijuana company the Green Organic Dutchman, or TGOD, which also reported its fourth quarter results ending December 31st, with revenues of $3.2 million for the quarter and $11.1 million on the year, backed by a quarterly net loss of $144.75 million and a net loss on the year of $195.75 million. Those are quite the numbers. Jump over to Green Market Report for more on this. We have a good headline out in New Jersey, where yesterday the state Supreme Court ruled that a registered medical marijuana patient can't be fired from their job simply because they use medical cannabis. The decision offers protections to every registered patient in the state and requires that employers must reasonably accommodate off-duty medical marijuana use. In a wonderful twist, the New Jersey Attorney General's office got involved, coming in on the side of patients and arguing that they should be protected. Ben Adlin, writing over at Marijuana Moments, has a good update on the world of international drug control policy, as last week, Michelle Boudreau, a Director General at Health Canada responsible for controlled substances work, spoke positively of the decision by Canada to legalize adult use marijuana. Ms. Boudreau spoke before the UN Commission on Narcotics Drugs and pointed out that the nation's new legal marijuana industry has carved out a large chunk of business from the illicit market while having no effect at all on the percentage of young people who consume. Pop over to Kyle's story for more here, including a full copy of Ms. Boudreau's pro-cannabis comments. Our final story on the day is news out of the realm of alternative psychedelic medicine, with a just-announced planned opening of a medical clinic in Toronto, Canada, where people will be treated for anxiety and depression using the drug ketamine, which originated as an anesthetic drug used by veterinarians before finding a place as a recreational drug. I should probably drop a quick disclosure on this one, as the company behind the effort, Field Trip Health, is a client of our friends over at KCSA Strategic Communications, with whom we produce the Green Rush podcast with. Ketamine has been shown to hold promise as a treatment for people with difficult cases of anxiety and depression, and is used with the help of trained therapists. This overall storyline is super fascinating, so I definitely give this one a read. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again tomorrow morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, MJ Today Media, and to our awesome Patreon listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the Patreon listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today. Today.
One take, Shay. One take.